Hey Max, welcome to a RepVue Roundtable conversation. Excited to talk with you. For the audience out there, tell us a little bit about you and your role.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Excited to be here and thanks for having me. I am the VP and head of sales at Apollo.io. I've been here for about 4 months. So ending the ramp period and getting familiarized with the business. But I spent about 7 years at LinkedIn. It's really where I did my professional growing up, and spent the last 5.5 years at Miro, growing that business in a big way.
Yeah, two great brands for sure. How does the audience or sort of the segment that you're selling to in those roles compare to the segments that you're targeting at Apollo?
Yeah, for sure. So I was one of the early employees to sell Sales Navigator at LinkedIn. It was actually pre-Sales Navigator. We just had a iframe extension within Salesforce.
Interesting. Okay.
Started out pretty basic and developed into Sales Navigator. So that audience was nearly identical to who I'm selling to at Apollo today. Sales leaders, rev ops leaders, BDR, SDR leaders. And so I'm back. I'm back doing that again for the second time, which is really, really fun.
Cool. So let's dig in a little bit to the LinkedIn experience as kind of a formative experience, sort of in the trenches, selling as an individual contributor. How did sort of that experience establish the foundation in sales for you, and what are some takeaways that apply to what you're doing in Apollo today?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, I was just super lucky. Like, I didn't really know what I was getting into at the time. I landed at LinkedIn through happenstance, through a
Hmm.
friend, and didn't realize until later how fortunate I was to work there. It truly shaped me professionally and personally, not just within sales, but within, a number of different aspects. And I think, LinkedIn was a masterclass in situational thinking. Like, they're phenomenal at building frameworks and methodologies in terms of how to approach situations, how to approach different scenarios. And it's really been the gift that's kept on giving. I find myself constantly reverting back to things that I learned there and applying them to situations here. And as I think about why that was the case, I think it really started with phenomenal hiring and phenomenal leaders. Like, I was just surrounded by great people that taught me a lot, and direct managers that I had, indirect managers, folks that were on my team. I learned a lot through osmosis just by like observing senior leaders and the way that they operated. Super empathetic, super compassionate, super thoughtful. I mean, it shaped me in so many different ways. I think one real foundational tenet around sales and around performance that LinkedIn did phenomenally well was performance was based on three core principles: leadership, leverage, and results. And leadership was defined as rallying people towards a shared objective. Leverage was defined as helping scale the business 10x, and results, I think, is fairly self-explanatory.
Hmm.
But they were equally weighted. And so what you had was sort of the opposite of a coin operated sales environment. Like, it wasn't this thing where results were the number one North Star at all costs. It was far more collaborative. And it was reinforced at every level. I think that was the most important thing. Like, when
And
it
this
came,
was not just for sales leaders, but also for individual contributors, you're saying?
this was actually for the entire company.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
whether you were an engineer in
Okay.
product, marketing,
Interesting. Yeah.
operations, and sales, yeah, everybody followed the same leadership, leverage, and results model. So when it came time for promotions, or when it came
Hmm.
time for performance reviews, or any sort of opportunity you had, you were measured against these three categories.
Okay.
And the consistency of it was incredible. Not only was it a performance tenet, but it was really like a cultural drumbeat. Like,
Hmm.
everybody was trying to strive to be a better leader, to create more leverage for the business, and to generate a high degree of results. And
Interesting.
everyone was bought in. And it was something that the CEO reinforced and talked about a lot. It was really the whole package that mattered, not just the results. And I think that really shaped my thinking about how I wanted to lead, and the sales organizations that I wanted to be a part of, being far more collaborative and about the
Mm.
mission and about the
Yeah.
value, not just about hitting quota or hitting a number.
Right. That's interesting to be able to apply that effectively at a large organization, right? It's one thing to say, like, we're at a startup, everybody should have their own impact. But when you get into thousands or tens of thousands of employees, it seems like it would be a lot more challenging to apply that sort of like individual impact methodology. But it sounds like from a culture standpoint, they were able to do that there, which is cool to see. Any thoughts on why that might be?
So Jeff Weiner was the CEO at LinkedIn for many years. And he's been on a few podcasts where he's talked about this, but it's really about creating a drum beat.
Hmm.
And I think the analogy that he used was, when you start to get sick of hearing yourself say something, when it becomes annoying for you, is
Yeah.
probably at the point that the recipient is starting to digest it.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And
Interesting.
and beating the drum consistently was a huge part of his approach. It's every all hands. Every time he's up in front of the company, every time he had an opportunity to speak, he was very consistent. And then the consistency trickled down to his directs and their directs and onwards, and then embedded in our performance review culture, embedded in one-on-ones, and I think most importantly, embedded in what they celebrated. Like
Okay. Yeah.
annual awards for leadership, not just for a leader, but people that embody leadership. Annual
Interesting.
award for leverage, awards for results. So it was
Yeah.
reinforced at every level, and it taught people what mattered, and it encouraged people to strive for what was most important for the business.
Nice. Interesting. So, so first of all, I just want to give you kudos for starting with, I got a little lucky, because I'm always surprised at how rare it is that people acknowledge that, that, it's easy to look back in hindsight and be like, I had a grand plan. I went from step one to step two to step three, but in most cases, it just kind of, maybe it just worked out that way and you happen to
There
be
was
in the
there
right
was
place at the right time.
no grand plan. Like I
Yeah.
floundered.
Yeah.
I envy people that know what they want.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those people. I came out of school and had no idea,
Okay. Yeah.
no real direction. And then I very much stumbled into sales, which I don't think is too uncommon. But
Sure. Not at all.
for me, I really didn't know. And I think
Hmm.
that's why that LinkedIn experience was so transformational, is because it really just like who I am and who I wanted to be and got me in the profession.
For sure. For sure. Okay, cool. All right. So let's bring it to sort of current day. You're still relatively new at Apollo, but give us just a quick high level overview of the sales org. How many people, what countries and regions, sort of how is it set up?
Yeah, sure. So the sales organization today is roughly 120 sellers and leaders, and pretty well distributed across the US, Latin America, and Europe. Apollo historically has been a very remote friendly company,
Interesting.
and so the team is fairly distributed. But we do have hubs, and so there is a hybrid model to some of our roles, and we have offices in San Francisco, Salt Lake City, Austin, New York, Mexico City, and London.
Okay. And so it's interesting because you mentioned earlier in your career or early in your career, learning through sort of osmosis and, picking things up from those around you. Are there things that you do as a sales leader leading a largely remote sales org to try to enable people, especially people early in their career, to get some of that benefit, which is inherently harder when you're working remote?
Yeah, I mean, it's so different now. I take that part really seriously. I think maybe I'm overly sensitive to it, but I never want to be the leader who's disconnected. I never
Mhm.
want to be the leader that folks don't hear from or don't have an understanding of or don't know what my priorities are, what I'm working on. So we lead a very consistent enablement calendar, and the enablement team is with the whole field every Thursday for about an hour. I attend that call every Thursday, and I'll often lead portions of the enablement content and share my perspective, because they should hear from me. They should hear my
Mhm.
perspective, and they should have a good understanding of why we're enabling on the things that we are. I also run a pretty regular AMA cadence,
Mhm.
and very informal. I just like
Okay.
let's
Yeah.
leave the door open and talk. I think when I was in IC, the thing that I appreciated most about some of the leaders that I had was the level of transparency they operated with. And it's something that I've always strived to do, is just be open about like my own personal feelings on things, open about what's going on in the business. I think this notion of bringing people along is really critical. And it's even more so critical when you're in a distributed environment. I think like there's no amount of communication that's too much, uh, in terms of like cascading.
So I'm just curious tactically, because conceptually those things totally make sense. But tactically, like how do you enable that remotely? So for example, metaphorically, the door is open, but is it just through Slack or you're posting on internal forums or like what methods have you found that can sort of effectively simulate that sort of in-person open door experience?
Yeah, I mean, we live in a very Slack heavy world
Hmm.
these days, so lots happening there.
Yeah.
I really try to put calls on the calendar. I love huddling with people over Slack too. It's, having a live conversation is so much more meaningful to me and so much faster and more relevant. But I try to do these things consistently so that people understand that the door is open. I think if you say the door is open,
Right.
I don't know that many people are going to take you up
People
on
aren't
it.
always willing to take the risk and reach out.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
but if you lead with it, if you're putting calls on the calendar, if you're huddling, if you're having conversations, if you're texting people, calling people, I think you have to practice what you preach.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's get into sort of another level down on Apollo. So, for those who aren't aware, which I think one of the things that's interesting about your business is most salespeople probably are aware, but let's assume for those who don't, what would be kind of your elevator pitch for how you position Apollo?
Yeah. So for many years, Apollo's aim has been to democratize go to market and make it readily accessible for everybody, and do so by providing a really rich B2B data set,
Hmm.
accounts, and contacts, and
Yeah.
then equipping sellers and marketers and teams with the right tools to effectively use that data set to find the right buyers and find the right customers, to reach those customers and prospective buyers through multiple channels, and also engage with them in a thoughtful way. And I think we've seen the product evolve a lot in a sophisticated way with AI and with more complex workflows, so that our customers can utilize the data set and utilize the workflows in a way that is customized and designed for them. And I think the outcomes that we're seeing are pretty clear. Our customers are increasing their pipeline,
Hmm.
they're improving their rep productivity, and they're reducing overall cost of acquisition by having a number of tools and a number of different workflows live within one platform. And so instead of navigating from tab to tab or app to app or tool to tool, they're consolidating and bringing a lot of that effort into Apollo and unifying on one single platform.
Okay. So for sellers out there, what's something that you would say is unique or characteristic about the fact that you're selling to salespeople?
Yeah.
How do you kind of position that as for somebody who's considering selling for Apollo?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, this is my second stint doing this,
Hmm.
having done it at LinkedIn for many years. I'd
Yeah.
say it's fun. It's really
Yeah.
fun. You are selling to an audience or a demographic of people that understand the selling motion, the selling process, and the buying process. And so I think there's an opportunity to be very direct. I think there's an opportunity to be very honest. I've always operated with this notion of showing my cards and being transparent with buyers and customers. Like, I don't think there's any need to play any games. I think that there's an opportunity to communicate very clearly and very directly about the objectives that we have and about what we're trying to drive for them. And it's not without its challenges, given the fact that we're sitting on the same side of the table,
Hmm. Hmm.
and the cards are on that table.
Right.
Can have a certain set of challenges in speaking the same language, but I really enjoy it.
So just to dig in there a little bit, when you say not playing any games, are you talking about things like transparent pricing or like end of month or end of quarter discounting or things like that? Is that what you're getting at there?
Yeah, I think that there's probably like an old school set of tactics there that
Hmm. For
some
sure.
sales organizations are still following, for better or worse. When you're running those plays against an audience of people that is very familiar with them, they probably don't understand.
Right. Right. No, that seems like something that might be less effective when you're selling to a salesperson.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So it challenges you in a different way to be more
Hmm.
value driven and be more thoughtful and actually meet them where they're at. And I think that's a really good test of your skill set and
Okay.
develop it the right way.
So we'll get into questions about AI in a bit, but like with the rise of AI technologies, the data and data sources become even more important. Obviously, Apollo, I think of Apollo as a data source of information on prospects. How do you differentiate? There's a lot of data sources out there. Why is Apollo special? How do you sort of differentiate a source of data from somewhere else that somebody might get that data?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just to double down on your point, I think intelligent workflows and AI is only going to be as powerful as the data that's powering it. And I think that's where we feel uniquely positioned as we've layered on AI capabilities and more advanced capabilities, that we have the correct data set to power it. Apollo's been at this for a long time. over a decade in building out this data network and this data platform. And there's a number of sophisticated ways that they're capturing, analyzing, verifying, enriching. And we've seen a lot of new enhancements with Waterfall to go through a sequence of verification steps to ensure that we're delivering, the best names, emails, titles, contact information, phone numbers, etc. And I think AI will only continue to advance our ability and what we can do with it. And it's such early innings right now. I
Hmm.
can think people are jumping to a lot of conclusions about where we are with AI, and it is just very much
For
the
sure.
beginning.
So, as an aside, give us a little flavor for you and kind of who you are, what you like to do when you're not leading the sales team at Apollo. Whether it's entertainment that you like to do, or what how do you or what you like to do on the weekend, something there.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Santa Barbara, California, and I'm lucky to be back living here again. I grew up surfing. I grew up playing golf. I still try to do those things as much as possible. I have 3 kids, 3 young kids. So getting out and doing those things isn't quite as easy as it once was. My life, on the weekends and outside of work is really surrounded with them and doing the things that they love to do. It's just often just being outdoors and playing. But in my spare time, as it relates to sales and tech, I try to learn and absorb as much as I can. I geek out on a lot of the business related things that are happening in the world and paying attention to trends and themes. The 20 VC podcast with Harry Stebbings is one that I've
Okay.
leaned into
Yeah.
a lot. He does a weekly show with Jason Lemkin and Rory O'Driscoll where they go deep on current state of affairs. And it's been an episode that I look forward to every week and try to do it on long runs or workouts when I have
Nice.
time away from the kids.
Cool. Well, you just have to. Hopefully, the kids like surfing, and then you can take them out there and
Exactly.
and
That's the step. They're a little too young,
yeah,
but
yeah,
that's the goal.
for sure.
100%.
For sure. Okay. So let's get into some of the more detailed kind of tactical questions or tools. We'd be remiss if we didn't kind of start with the hot topic, I would say, which is just sort of AI specifically. What's your view on how AI tools should or maybe shouldn't be part of the sales process?
Well, first of all, they absolutely should. To me, that's a no-brainer. I think every sales organization is looking for an efficiency gain and
Hmm.
look for sharper and better productivity. And I think AI is so well positioned to help accomplish that. I think the challenge will always come back to relevance and value for buyers. And I think we've seen AI deployed in a few different ways that wasn't overly value centric for buyers. And I think the question to ask is, does AI make the buyer experience better or worse? I think selfishly, we could look at our own organizations and say, how does this make our life better?
Hmm.
I don't know how well that translates to the buyers. And so
Interesting.
always questioning, are we meeting them where they are? Are we making their purchasing process easier or better? And are we adding value for them as customers in the long run? To me is really the gut check on AI right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting lens because it's probably easier to think of examples where AI makes the salesperson's life or task easier, a little more challenging to think of where it makes the customer's experience easier. Are there any examples that come to mind that you would sort of call out to your team of sort of that positive example of AI enhancing the experience of the customer
Yeah,
in
I
the
mean,
sales process?
it's a little meta because we're selling a
Sure,
sales tool to
sure.
salespeople with the overall goal of making their life easier. I think specifically for our customers and their use cases, sales is very labor intensive. I mean, selling is hard. It's even harder when you have a bunch of administrative tasks that you have to do on a regular
Hmm.
basis. I think for us, we're trying to alleviate that as much as possible. Like, how
Yeah,
can we
yeah.
speed up time to everything? Specifically, though, prospecting and outbound. There's so much research, there's so much prospecting cycles, there's so much administrative task work that happens. There's a lot of stats and things that have been shared in independent studies that sellers are really only spending somewhere between 20 to 30% of their time actually selling. And
Okay.
that's a pretty daunting number.
Yeah.
We want to improve that metric as much as possible. And I think with AI, there's such a massive opportunity for us to impact that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So when you think about this, like, let's put AI tools aside, what is one aspect of sales that you would actually say is much more important now than it was maybe 5 years ago?
Yeah. The funny part about 5 years ago is like COVID was just starting.
Sure.
Crazy
Huh?
that it's been 5 years
Right.
already. I think everybody Or I think a lot of people would answer that question discussing things like personalization. I think personalization is a big topic, and personalization at scale and the opportunity to bring relevance to a prospect or customer. I think there's a lot of debate on that topic over the last few years. To me, I think the thing that continues to become more and more prevalent is that the biggest decisions in a deal or the biggest decisions in a sale are going to happen when you're not in the room.
Mm, okay.
And so your opportunity to impact it in an indirect way continues to be more important than ever before.
Mhm.
And there's a number of different ways that you can impact it, but influencing that meeting and influencing those conversations that are happening when you are not present is one of the most critical parts of the sales motion today.
Okay. I like that. All right. So let's talk about, is there an, let's say, unpopular opinion that you hold about sales or something that might kind of cut against the conventional wisdom, but you deep down really believe that it's true? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah. Um, I don't really care about activity metrics. I think
Okay.
that might be an unpopular opinion. And maybe
Yeah.
this comes from my time at LinkedIn. But to me, it's not the drum that I beat.
Okay.
I don't care if you sent 1,000 emails, 100 emails, or 10 emails. The thing that I care most about is that you had a quality meeting.
Mm.
And when I think about metrics and analyzing funnels, the thing that I'm looking at most is meetings. And
Hmm.
not just volume of those meetings, but the quality of those meetings.
Right. Right.
And I would define quality as the persona that we're meeting with, the seniority of that persona, and then the
Hmm.
throughput of that meeting. Is that
Yeah.
meeting turning into another meeting?
Hmm.
And if we're meeting with the right seniority levels, the right personas, and progressing meetings to second meetings, to me, that's a very good indication. Now, if we're not holding meetings at all, then sure, we should look back and understand why. Is it a volume problem, an
For
activity
sure.
problem? Is it a channel or source problem? But I'm not beating the drum on whether somebody sent 100 emails or 1,000 emails in a given day.
Yeah, interesting. No, that's a great answer. I think a lot of salespeople would probably be excited to hear that. Obviously, you still have to deliver, but that's a good one for sure. All right, cool. Okay, so this is sort of a hot seat portion of the conversation from a RepVue perspective, right? The reason RepVue exists is to bring more transparency to sales, so that we can help people find great sales orgs. And so we're all about data and transparency. So I wanted to ask you about some of the things that I noticed in your RepVue profile specifically and that sellers might have questions about when they look at it. So we'll jump into that. So the first thing that really stands out, and this really stood out to me because it's pretty rare to see, is your inbound lead flow score. Super high. I think you're in above, I think 94th percentile. So, we often joke at RepVue that like no sales rep ever says they have enough leads. And they almost always rate that area relatively low, but it
Yeah.
seems like that's not necessarily the case at Apollo. So tell me a little bit more about that. Why do you think that is?
Yeah. It's funny, as I was going through my interview process of doing my due diligence on Apollo, this came up. And I surely thought it couldn't be as true or as strong as the numbers
Hmm.
would suggest. And I've, been pleasantly surprised, and it's been very validating to see how the business operates. Our inbound lead flow is substantial and is driving a big portion of the business. And I think if you look at why, there's a few reasons. I think product market fit for us is really, really good. I think
Hmm.
there's a clear need for rich and powerful data, and there's no shortage of it. Like, everybody needs better data, and so there's a really clear need that we're servicing. There's also a huge distribution. Uh, Apollo is very much a product-led business, and there's a strong self-serve motion that exists. And so getting folks into the tool early through a free account or through one of our basic
Hmm.
accounts is often a really healthy start as they get familiarized, and then they are looking to add on and looking to do more with us.
Interesting. So that's an important distinction. Do you seek out sellers that have operated in kind of that product led model before, or is it more of a, they could come from a sales led growth environment, but now they're going to have the benefit of more inbound leads? Like, how do you think about that balance?
Yeah, and I would say no, like, not a prerequisite that you worked in PLG before, not a detractor either. I think people that
Hmm.
have worked in heavy outbound motions have a really strong skill set, though, because you know how to generate your own pipeline, you know how to work really diligently, you know how to qualify well, you know how to generate interest, you know how to build champions. Like, there's a lot of skills that get honed when you're forced to go outbound. And I really value a lot of those skills that people have. And so coming into an environment where you have that foundation and then you get introduced to a heavy inbound lead flow should be a really good recipe.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. How do you prevent, if there's so many leads coming in, how do you prevent your team from, for lack of a better term, getting kind of lazy, and just kind of taking what comes as opposed to sort of potentially targeting some accounts, especially on the larger enterprise side?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's a few different ways to solve for it. I mean, one is headcount modeling and doing it the right way so that you have proper distribution, and making sure that the productivity metrics can back into it in a thoughtful way. And then it's like it comes down to a cultural drumbeat and what you're driving towards. I think there's mechanisms, and we did this really well at Miro. So Miro was predominantly very PLG business, and we successfully transitioned it to being a healthy mix of both PLG and sales led. And we did that in a really thoughtful way. We had reps identify target accounts that they wanted to go after based on a number of different variables and factors. Started to do really diligent account planning and org mapping. We introduced sales methodologies like command of the message, qualification frameworks like MEDPIC, and really started to drive a rigorous view at how we can take these target accounts and turn them into big customers and do it in a thoughtful way and oriented an operating cadence around those things. Proper account reviews, proper deal reviews, proper cross-functional alignment with other teams to make sure that we were tracking and monitoring what we wanted the outcomes of that effort to be. And
Hmm.
sure, you had a lot of inbound and PLG stuff running in the background, but we really dedicated extra time to focus every single week on a target set of accounts where we wanted to make progress. And that's where the cultural drumbeat started to get driven.
Okay. So let's dig into comp a little bit. Obviously, salespeople like to make money, and people on RepVue, we definitely see their attention oftentimes go to how much money they can make. There's two different sort of high level elements to this. One is obviously just kind of how you set up the comp plan to begin with, what the OTE looks like, and the other is the percentage of team meeting quota. So I know you're relatively new to Apollo, but from what I see in the data historically, it looks like Apollo is about average in terms of the base and variable comp sentiment from the data we've collected from reps, but that they really shine in percentage of reps hitting quota, which is well over 50%, I think 55%, when we're recording this, which is an amazing number. A lot of people, most salespeople know this, but some people don't realize how rare it is that over 50% of the team is hitting quota. Tell us a little bit, is that consistent with your philosophy in terms of how you compensate and motivate your team? And how should reps who might be considering applying think about what to expect for
Yeah,
comp and
sure.
quota attainment?
Yeah. So look, I think there's many schools of thought on this, and it can be debated for eternity.
Hmm.
I see many sellers lured into inflated OT numbers, and really, really attractive figures, and then end up walking away with less in their W 2. And so I think there's two components to this. Firstly, it just comes back to rep productivity and ensuring that the right profitability exists for the business. And the challenge with really high OTEs is you need to have a really strong market economics and strong product market fit conditions to ensure that there's a high degree of consistency. And all of the like ACV and
Hmm.
LTV economics actually support the OTs. And I see a lot of environments where you have a high OT and wrong market economics actually support it. And so where we try to thread the needle is pushing the team to help grow the business, but doing it in a thoughtful way that keeps numbers real and attainable. So having a high percentage of the team hit the number is absolutely part of our strategy. We want to be able to clearly articulate what you need to do to hit your number. And in my mind, there needs to be multiple paths to do that. And those paths need to be rooted in reality. And if I can't effectively articulate to you how you could hit your number across multiple different paths, then the number's wrong,
Hmm.
or the system's broken,
Right.
or our strategy is not strong enough. And that's my responsibility to ensure that the strategy is strong enough. You have the tools and the systems and your setup in order to hit your number. And if everybody does their job well, then everybody should hit their number. Like the path
Hmm.
should be very clear. And so we absolutely strive for that.
Right. Okay. All right. And I don't know if I asked you explicitly. Tell us a little bit about, what can you share about your hiring plans for 2026 in terms of either just a number of seats or regions or any other details that you can share.
We are absolutely hiring. Hiring is going to be a huge priority for us. We have a number of active open roles today. So we're effectively hiring for nearly every single role across our go-to-market team right now. But
Okay. Okay.
I'll
Cool.
highlight a few specifically: SMB AEs, mid-market AEs, mid-market leadership, and we are opening up a few up-market roles within our enterprise segment. So we'll have two founding enterprise AEs and a number of leadership roles for next year.
All right. That's pretty broad across the board. So lots of opportunity there. Okay. So what I want to do now is dig into some of the reviews on RepVue. So the main thing that people know RepVue for is the ratings and the RepVue score. But people can also leave reviews, and we generally find that they're fairly balanced in highlighting some things that are great about the org and maybe other things that they wish were better. So mentioning a couple things there, several of the reviews mention, and again, taking into account that you are have been there, less than 6 months probably when this will have aired. So I'm sure you're still getting settled to some extent. But the historical data that we see is kind of like a startup culture, but within a bigger, relatively larger sales org, as well as kind of rapid growth. And there's good, exciting aspects of that, and there's also can be frustrating aspects of that. Can you speak a little bit to kind of what you've seen in the time that you've been there as it relates to that changing culture and kind of the degree to which you classify Apollo as a startup?
Yeah, for sure. And as you mentioned, I can't speak to the full history, but there's certainly been a lot of change in strategy, and there's been a lot of change in leadership. And so I totally understand the sentiment and the perspective. Makes a ton of sense. Just in the last year, we've hired myself, a new CRO, a new chief marketing officer, a new chief product officer. Our COO is about a year and a half in. And so you look at the executive team that's in place today is all
Hmm.
within the last year. And
Okay.
so think about the folks that have been here prior. They've probably seen a lot of change as executives
Sure.
have left
Sure.
this and come in. This is absolutely a build phase. And so
Hmm.
going back to the move from product led to sales led, Paulo is done very well building a really strong product led business, and the sales led portion of it is still relatively new. We've added a ton of people this year. We've grown the business tremendously, and as part of that, we have a lot we still need to build towards. And so there's a lot of foundational building that's happening. And I think for folks that can feel like a high degree of change, I think one thing that I've really appreciated about the culture coming in is people's ability to adapt to that change
Hmm.
and their willingness to lean in. It takes a lot of experimentation. It takes a lot of testing. It takes a lot of growth mindset for people to endure change and capture learnings and adapt. And I think that's part of moving from being very PLG dominant to more of
Interesting.
a product led and sales led mixture. Is that change will be a constant, but hopefully it's a healthy thing, and it provides a lot of really good learnings for people. I think for me personally, like the times that I've grown the most and the times that I've learned the most are in moments of big change.
Interesting.
And the business has a ton of momentum, and things are going very well. So hopefully for everyone, it's changed in the right direction.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about what it's like to sell for on your team or for Apollo moving forward. And let's think about it through the lens of habits. So you mentioned sort of not necessarily focused on activity in the same way that some sales leaders are, but obviously that could still be important if you're not hitting goal. But like, what's one habit that you would say probably 90% of sellers that are going to be successful at Apollo in 2026 have? Is there anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, I get this question a lot in interviews. It's like, what are the
Okay.
best people doing on the team?
Yep.
To me, it's super clear. Like, yes, you could say all these things like grit and there's sort of like a canned answer. I think really specifically, it's deep intellectual curiosity. And what I find is that as folks come into the business and they start to learn the product and they start to learn our customer base, they start to ask questions and go through discovery. And we might be talking to a prospect and the prospect says, I have a pipeline issue.
Hmm.
And the seller might just dive right into our platform. Cool. Let me show you all the bells and whistles, all the things that we can do to pipeline issue. The people that are excelling and doing well is that when the prospect says, I have a pipeline issue, they go to the next 3, 4, 5, 6 layers. Is it
Hmm.
an inbound issue or an outbound issue? Is it a BDR issue or an AE issue? Is it a
Hmm.
marketing issue? Is it a top of funnel issue? Is it a email deliverability issue? Are you not generating enough response? Are you not generating enough meetings? Are those meetings not converting into pipeline? Is there a breakdown in the funnel there? And so we need to deeply understand the customer and where their pain points and challenges are. And then from there, we can start to map back where Apollo, where the platform is going to, solve that problem. And it's the people that are taking the time to be curious and deeply understand are the ones that are successfully mapping the platform to specific solutions. We can do a lot. We can do too much. And we don't need to sell the whole platform to provide customer value. We just need to deeply understand what it is that we're solving for first. And
Interesting.
the folks that are doing that well are definitely the ones that are excelling.
Okay. So if you had to kind of summarize the sales culture, you've mentioned a lot of different aspects about it. We just talked about habits, but what would stand out as kind of an overall description for you?
I'd say, so I'm 4 months in, and there's a
Hmm.
lot of observations about the team that was here. And there's been a lot of things that I've been really pleasantly surprised by. I would say collaboration is probably the thing that stands out most. I'm seeing people, constantly jump in to help their peers. I'm seeing people cascade learnings that they have from deals, both wins and losses, maybe the losses more importantly.
Hmm. Sure.
I'm having, seeing people share things that are working really well for them, whether it be, a messaging or a piece of content or a certain question they're asking. And it's a group of people that are encouraged by seeing their peers win. And I feel very fortunate that that's the case because, as we talked about with LinkedIn earlier, like that is very much the environment where I personally thrive, is
Hmm.
sort of the opposite of this coin operated of sentiment, and more of one where we're winning collectively and the business is winning collectively.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and actually talk about RepVue, if you don't mind. We appreciate working with Apollo, having Apollo as a customer. Can you speak a little bit to sort of how that looks from a sales leader perspective, either for you personally or for the org, in terms of how RepVue impacts how you guys have grown?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's like three core ways I've interacted with RepVue the most. The first is that I used it heavily to do my own research
Nice.
when I was evaluating opportunities. So prior to joining Apollo, I talked to a lot of companies, and I leaned on RepVue heavily to look at reviews and ratings and help educate myself on what was going on in these businesses. The second thing is, we see our own sellers lean really
Hmm.
heavily on RepVue as they do research on their customers. So
Love it.
again, fairly meta, but
Hmm.
because we sell a sales tool to salespeople,
For
it's
sure.
incredibly helpful for us to use it as a prospecting tool. And we can see, what tools they're using, what are some of the challenges with those tools, what are some of the issues that people have, and help use that to educate or inform our positioning and where we feel like we might be able to add more
Hmm.
value.
Yeah.
And then, lastly, and maybe most obvious is like we we know that our candidates are leaning on RevVue to do their own research and their own education. And we constantly get questions. People that are reading reviews or hearing things about us is sourced and coming from RevVue, so it plays deeply into the candidate process.
Glad to hear it. And especially glad to hear that it's helped you find a great sales lead personally. That's the best thing that somebody can say. So glad to hear that for sure. Cool. Well, let's wrap up as we with kind of some forward-looking questions, or one forward-looking question, I would say, which is, what are a few predictions when this runs? It'll probably be early 2026. What are some predictions that you might have about sales and tech in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, look, the most obvious thing is that AI is going to be highly disruptive. I think that is the captain obvious statement.
Yeah.
It's just so extremely early right now, and I
Hmm.
think we haven't even begin to see the extent of what's going to happen, specifically within go to market. There's going to be huge disruptive change in agentic workflows and things that will impact sellers and buyers. And I think it'll happen in a really thoughtful and meaningful way. And I'm really excited to see the direction that it goes over the course of the next even 6 to 12 months at the rate that things are moving. So that's a big one. Maybe more from a tech landscape. I'm optimistic that we'll see an IPO window open up here. We've seen a little bit more momentum. There's a couple handful of sleeping giants that I think we're kind of waiting to see what they do, but I think there will be an IPO window that will open up and some acceleration there, which I'm really excited about. And then I do think that there's this interesting shift and back shift in point solutions and platform solutions that has been fun to observe and fun to watch. And we've seen the shift from high level point solutions to platforms, back to high level solutions, back to platforms. And I think we'll continue to see this kind of cyclical trend over the course of, the next 12 months. And it's just been an interesting one for me to observe.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, that's all we have for you, Max. We appreciate you joining us.
Awesome. Thanks.
I think this will definitely be useful to folks who are looking at potentially joining Apollo. So thanks for sharing your perspective.
Likewise. Thank you.